Get your stuff and leave. You're not my responsibility anymore. My own son, Darren, said that to me with the cold confidence of someone who thought he'd made it in life, and that I, his father, was now nothing more than a burden. He didn't raise his voice. That was the worst part. He said it the way you'd dismiss an old appliance, used up, outdated, and taking up space. Rain was already falling when he opened the door. He didn't even let me gather my things from the spare bedroom I had been sleeping in for the past 6 months. Instead, he thrust a small suitcase into my hands. It had my shaving kit, 2 shirts, and a pair of worn-out shoes. Nothing else. The door shut behind me, with a finality that didn't belong in a father-son relationship. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch of the very house I had helped him buy 5 years ago, soaked in rain, heart hollowed by shame. I had raised him alone after his mother passed. Worked extra shifts. Skipped meals so he could eat better. Drove a rusted car so he could wear branded sneakers. And now, at 63, without a job and no place to go, I was cast out like a stray. But here's what Darren didn't know, and what no one in this family ever cared to ask: I wasn't broke. I wasn't helpless. And I was most certainly not finished. Losing the job wasn't the hardest part. No, the hardest part was pretending every morning that I still had one, putting on a collared shirt, packing a lunch, and leaving Drin's house at 8 a.m. so he wouldn't know the truth. I wandered parks. Sat in libraries. Nursed cups of coffee at gas stations. Just to avoid facing the shame of telling my son that after 22 years, they'd restructured me out of relevance. I thought I'd get back on my feet quickly. I had always been dependable. Resilient. But job hunting at 63 feels like shouting into a void. No callbacks. No interviews. Just polite rejections or worse, silence. As the weeks stretched on, my modest savings dried up. I finally asked Darren, quietly, humbly, if he could help cover a few bills until I got back on track. He didn't even look up from his phone. Dad, come on. You're the one who always said, don't ask unless it's life or death. I chuckled weakly, trying to lighten it. Well, we might be getting close to that. That's when he sighed, like I was an inconvenience. You should be planned better. What were you doing all those years? I almost told him the truth then. About the hidden accounts, the quiet investments, the portfolio I had built dollar by dollar while everyone thought I was just getting by. But something stopped me. Maybe pride. Maybe the sudden realization that he would never have helped me out of love, only obligation. The final blow came the next Sunday, at dinner. His wife, Lena, served the food like she was hosting royalty. Everyone, his colleagues, neighbors, her yoga friends, was there. That's when Darren clinked his glass. We've decided, he said, beaming like he was announcing a pregnancy, that it's time for Dad to transition into independent living. A few chuckles. A few awkward sips. No one knew what he meant until he looked at me. Meaning we'd like the guest room back, Dad. Lena's expecting. You'll be better off somewhere with people your age. I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. Not my daughter-in-law. Not even my niece who used to call me Uncle Rock. I nodded, stood up, and quietly cleared my plate. I left that night. No shouting. No tears. Just the soft resolve of a man who realized the people he sacrificed everything for had no idea who he really was. After I left Drin's house, I checked into a modest rental apartment near the edge of town, a faded complex with cracked pavement and a broken mailbox. It was small. Cold. But it was mine. For the first time in years, I had space to think. I didn't call anyone. No dramatic exits. No parting speeches. Let them believe they'd left me broken and penniless. That was easier. What they didn't know, what no one had ever asked about, was that I had been quietly preparing for this moment for decades. While Darren pursued flashy degrees and brag-worthy startups, I lived in silence and discipline. I never bought the new car. Never took fancy vacations. I took every spare dollar, every side hustle, every overtime hour, and tucked it into something most people didn't notice: time and compound interest. My late wife, Helen, and I had once dreamed of retiring by the ocean. She passed before we could. I never touched that money afterward. It hurt too much. So I kept saving, investing, buying and selling quietly, stocks, real estate, even a small percentage in a local logistics company that got acquired in 2019. That was a good day. Quiet, but good. No one knew, not even Darren, that I had amassed over $3.4 million in assets. I had written no checks from that account. No flashy spending. Just quiet security. The kind a father builds when he knows the world is unpredictable. But now, standing alone with a coffee mug and my old laptop in a creaky apartment, I opened the login page to my trust account. Everything was still there, untouched. And for the first time since Helen passed, I realized something: that money didn't have to go to Darren anymore. I had always assumed he'd be responsible, that he'd care, that he'd honor our values. But he didn't even offer me a coat when it was raining. He didn't ask if I was okay, just how soon I could get out of his life. I started making calls that night, not to him, but to my lawyer, my accountant, and Mia. Mia was my niece, my late brother's daughter. She never asked for anything. She worked 2 jobs to help her mother through cancer treatments. She'd always remembered my birthday. She was the only one who called me Uncle Henry with warmth, even when she was struggling. And during those silent weeks after I left Drin's house, she was the only one who checked in. Not to pry, not to pity, just to say, "I miss you." That was enough. I had no grand plan yet, but I knew this: Darren would not inherit what he threw away. And Mia, who expected nothing, would receive everything. The silence from Darren didn't last forever. At first, it was blissful. I spent my mornings walking along the river, sipping cheap coffee, reading books I'd never had time for. I worked with Mia behind the scenes, offering seed capital, connecting her with my old business contacts, helping her build a sustainable foundation for her mental health startup. She didn't want to take the money at first. "You sure, Uncle Henry?" she asked, wide-eyed. "You always lived so carefully." I smiled. Careful doesn't mean small. It means ready. And I was ready for everything. Then the call came. "Dad," Drin's voice crackled through the speaker, a tremble just under the surface, "do you have a minute?" It had been 4 months since he kicked me out. I stayed quiet. He sighed, and I heard him trying to sound casual. "We hit a snag with the business. Expansion's bleeding money. Some of our investors are pulling out. We need liquidity, fast." I could almost picture him, pacing in his polished kitchen, wearing one of those overpriced watches I'd once helped him buy. "I remembered you mentioned that account you were saving for retirement. Maybe we could talk about a short-term loan." There it was, the first crack in his perfect world. I let the silence stretch. "Dad," I finally spoke. "I don't have a job anymore, remember? And according to you, I'm not your responsibility. I doubt you want my kind of help." He stammered, caught off guard. "It's not like that. It's just family should support each other." Family. That word, suddenly so convenient. "I agree," I said. "Which is why I've chosen someone in the family who actually remembers what that means." He didn't understand. Not yet. But he would. Over the next few weeks, his situation worsened. The startup that had once graced local business magazines was under investigation for misusing funds. Clients walked away. His wife's expensive tastes became liabilities. They sold their vacation home. Then the second car. But it wasn't enough. And as Drin's world shrank, Mia's expanded. She launched the beta version of her app. I helped negotiate a modest but meaningful deal with a healthcare provider. A small media outlet did a human interest piece on her story. Young woman builds empathy-driven startup while caring for terminally ill mother. The story went viral. And with it, new investors poured in. Mia didn't want the spotlight. She just wanted to help people. I made sure she had the means to do that, silently, strategically. And all the while, Darren had no idea who was quietly replacing him as the legacy of this family. But he was about to find out. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity, closure, and above all, I wanted the legacy of this family, what I had built through decades of discipline and sacrifice, to land in the hands of someone who would honor it, not exploit it. So I stopped reacting. And I started planning. First, I rewrote my will. I sat in the same old cafe I used to take Darren to as a child. He loved the caramel muffins, and signed away any inheritance he might have expected. The house deed I quietly retained in my name, transferred the offshore account, reassigned the 3 commercial rental units downtown that I bought under an LLC, now under Mia's name, with structured mentoring baked in. But I didn't stop there. I wanted Darren to understand, not just that I wasn't broke, but that I had always been 10 steps ahead. That he threw away something priceless not because it wasn't valuable, but because he was too arrogant to look deeper. So I sent him a message. A handwritten card, like the ones Helen used to send him when he got good grades. Dear Darren, you once told me I should be planned better. I did. You just never bothered to ask. Dad, that's all it said. No check. No explanation. Just a quiet warning, something was shifting, and he wasn't in control of it anymore. I knew he'd go digging. And he did. 2 days later, my old banker called me, chuckling. Your son tried to access your trust account. Claimed he was your financial proxy. I told him to lock it tighter. That same week, Mia's company received a glowing endorsement from a regional healthcare board. Her app was now being piloted across 3 hospitals. She was too busy to notice, but I saw the ripple effect. VCs were calling. Former classmates reached out to her with flattery. She kept her head down and worked harder. Unlike Darren, she never once asked for more. And that's when I knew, this comeback wasn't mine alone. It was the beginning of a new legacy. One grounded in empathy, not entitlement. Still, one piece remained, the confrontation. Not public, not yet. But soon. I wanted Darren to see what true legacy looked like, not through a lecture or lecture hall, but through the quiet rise of the very person he had once dismissed as just sweet little Mia. I booked a family dinner, not out of nostalgia, out of strategy. The dinner was my idea. I reserved the back room of the same upscale restaurant where Darren once celebrated his Series A funding round, where he gave that loud, smug toast about self-made success and forgot to even thank me. This time, I booked the table in my own name. Paid up front. Quiet power is best delivered without a tab. I invited only family, Darren, his wife Lena, and Mia. No fanfare. No context. Just a polite, handwritten invitation, dinner. Friday. Let's catch up. Dad, Darren arrived 10 minutes late, of course, smelling of expensive cologne and desperation. His suit didn't quite fit anymore. Probably hadn't bought a new one since the investors started pulling out. Lena trailed behind, tense. Mia was already there, early. As always, her laptop tucked away, her simple dress more confident than designer. We exchanged small talk. I let Darren do most of the talking. He tried to hide it, but he kept steering the conversation back to opportunities and bridges not being burned. I waited. Until dessert. Then I set a single manila envelope on the table. Neat. Understated. What's this? Darren asked, half laughing. Just some paperwork, I said. Things I thought you deserved to see. He opened it. His eyes scanned the contents, slowly at first, then faster. Inside were copies of my trust account, the real estate deeds, the new will. And at the very top, a formal statement revoking him as beneficiary, effective 6 months ago. His face paled. This is a joke, right? No, I said. This is me finally planning better. Like you suggested. He stared at me, then at Mia, who hadn't touched the envelope. She looked just as surprised as he did, but not horrified. Just stunned. You gave everything to her. Not everything, I said. Just the things worth preserving. He slammed the envelope shut. So this is punishment. For asking you to grow up. For telling you the truth. No, I said calmly, this is the consequence of treating someone who loved you like a liability. You thought I had nothing left. You didn't care enough to find out if that was true. You didn't fail because I didn't help you. Darren, you failed because you thought you didn't need help. Lena shifted awkwardly, her fork frozen mid-air. And Mia. I turned to her. She never asked for anything. But she earned everything, by remembering what family actually means. Mia's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't even know what to say. Say thank you. Then build something better with it. Darren stood. You're making a mistake. No, son. I made the mistake 35 years ago, when I assumed love and loyalty could be inherited. Turns out, they're not. He left without paying the bill. I didn't stop him. 6 months passed. I heard little from Darren, just whispers through mutual acquaintances. He had sold his remaining equity to stay afloat. Moved into a smaller condo. Word was, Lena left him not long after the dinner. They said she called him a stranger to his own father. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I had already said everything I needed to. Instead, I stayed close to Mia. She didn't parade her success. She worked hard. The company had grown faster than expected, and she poured everything into keeping it grounded. Her empathy-first platform was now serving over 40,000 users. The media started calling her the quiet heart of the tech world. One crisp fall morning, she asked if we could take a walk. She brought me to a building I hadn't seen before, a renovated brick space near the old part of town. There was a sign being hung over the entryway, the Helen Foundation for Dignity, Compassion, and Legacy. I stopped in my tracks. That was my late wife's name. Mia smiled. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to see it when it was real. Inside, the space was warm and filled with light. Counseling rooms. Community spaces. A digital lab. All designed for people who'd been dismissed, discarded, or underestimated, just like I had been. You didn't just give me money, Uncle Henry, Mia said, voice trembling. You gave me a map. I just wanted to build a place that shows people like you they're not invisible. That was the moment. The moment I knew it had all been worth it. The silence. The rejection. Even Drin's betrayal. Because this foundation, this legacy, wasn't revenge. It was rebirth. Later that year, Darren showed up uninvited at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He stood at the back, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. I greeted him with a nod. He approached as the crowd dispersed. I was wrong, he said, simply. About you. About everything. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, now you see the difference. You built a name. Mia built a legacy. He nodded once. You picked the right one. And walked away. He didn't ask for a second chance. And I didn't offer one. Not out of spite, but because legacy isn't given. It's earned.